Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We have interesting conversations with insightful people about how to apply behavioral sciences to work and life. In this episode, we spoke with Will Leach. Will is a marketer, econometrician, and author whose recent book, Marketing to Mindset, captured our attention even before it was published.
The book focuses on 4 key mind states. 1, activating a goal. 2, priming the need.
Priming.
It might have been one of the reasons we liked it. 3, framing up the choice. And 4, triggering the behavior. Will wrote the book for marketers who want to amp up their game by applying behavioral sciences to their work.
So before becoming an author, Will set up the Smart Lab at PepsiCo in a facility the size of a large discount store. And there he was able to test all sorts of prices and planograms and promotional messages and packaging on real-life consumers. Now, the challenges that he encountered in understanding the ways that people shopped led him to books like Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely and Tori Higgins and Heidi Grant Halverson's book called Focus. Both were tremendously influential on him.
In recent years, Will has worked with many global consumer goods companies to help them apply behavioral insights to packaging, pricing, and promotion of their products. Things, however, were really ratcheted up for Will when he met Phil Cusack, the founder of Wicked Crisp. It's a great story that Will talks about how he and Phil worked together on the development, branding, and marketing of a healthy snack food targeted at millennial moms.
Yeah.
Will also found Phil's caring approach to business to be really remarkable, and I think we did too. Like how Phil modified the machines in his facility to accommodate the special needs of his employees.
Yeah, Phil even hired a deaf man to manage inventory because he could work independently for much of the day. Phil Cusack is not just out to change the American diet, he's changing the way corporations work with people who have cognitive and physical impairments. We were so happy to hear about Phil Cusack and Wicked Crisp from our conversation with Will.
Will also shared 3 tips with us before we signed off. 1, set goals. It's important that our first step actually to set the goal and to own that goal. 2, manage the regulatory fit. Will reminded us that there's an important part of making decisions as frictionless as possible. And 3, use behavioral triggers. All of these help tell the mind what to do and when to do it.
So in our discussion about music, you remember music, don't you?
I tried to forget, but you keep reminding me.
Well, I was surprised by how much Will loves the sound of Motown. You know, Aretha Franklin, the Four Tops, Jackson 5, Bill Withers. But it was country music. You know, it was Pat Green and George Strait that enabled him to really get close to his sweetheart.
It always starts with a girl.
Always.
At least in country music. Yes. Before we turn you over to our discussion with Will, please put a note in your calendar to post a review on your favorite podcatcher about behavioral grooves. Word of mouth is really our only means of advertising, and we would appreciate you sharing your happy feelings about your experience with behavioral grooves.
Thank you. We would really appreciate it. So our conversation with Will was every bit as energetic as he is, and we hope that you find it as enjoyable as we did. So sit back in your favorite listening spot and grab your favorite beverage and close your eyes.
Unless you're driving. Don't do that if you're driving.
And please enjoy our conversation with Will Leach. Will Leach, welcome to the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's probably like sunny and 85 in Dallas today, right?
It is sunny and 95 every day in Dallas, guys. You guys got to come here because I know how cold it is over there. There's nothing but land over here in Dallas, Texas. Just come.
Yeah. Well, you guys don't have the snow that we have right outside the window here.
In Minnesota, it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and we got 2 inches of snow last night. So.
Yeah. And it's November 8th, 9th, whatever it is.
Hey, God love you for choosing to live there, guys.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
You love it.
We'll go there at some other point.
We'll leave it there. Okay, so we're going to start with the speed round. Ready?
I'm ready for the speed round, gentlemen.
Up the mountain or down the mountain?
Absolutely down the mountain.
Life without a mobile phone or life without a laptop?
You need the mobile phone.
Running, biking, or swimming?
Oh, I used to do triathlons. I am a biker.
Even when you're biking, you don't bring the extra tube, you got to carry it. All right, we might go there later. All right. Human mind, pristine well or a muddy pit?
Oh, a muddy pit. Very muddy, gentlemen.
All right.
Well, let's follow that for just a second. It's such a great image. Where did you come up with that?
Yeah, I'm going to not take as much credit as I want to for that. It was off of another person that was over at PepsiCo when I was working over there trying to start their behavioral sciences. And he was talking about the other side, which is this pristine well of, we all know what we want and we know why we choose what we choose and things like that. And so I took the exact opposite of that image in my head. And I thought, we're not a human, beautiful well of knowledge. We are much deeper and full of junk and things like that. So I will take somewhat partial credit for that.
All right. There you go. I like it. The image in my head was this, beautiful, serene area, and then, the pigs and the muddy pit. And I'm going, we're kind of somewhere there. Yeah. All right. So Will, tell us a little bit. You just wrote a book, that was marketing to mindsets. And
a practical guide to applying behavior design to research and marketing.
Right.
Emphasis on practical.
But I think the interesting piece here is really you didn't go into behavioral science. You got interested in this through some kind of a roundabout way. Help us understand what got you interested in behavioral science.
Yeah, guys, my background was actually in applied econometrics. So I went into grad school thinking all I want to do is model human behavior. And actually, I wanted to go into forecasting over the Chicago Board of Trade. I was going to be a millionaire by cracking the code on futures, right? So naive. But I went down the route. I found marketing research in grad school by accident. I went into data mining at a small utility, moved in eventually over to PepsiCo. And when I was at PepsiCo, I was just the traditional marketing research guy. I ran shopper insights for a while, ran innovation insights for a while over there at Frito-Lay, ran brand insights for a while, launched a couple of brands, things like that. And we had a really innovative group of executives. They came from all over the country. As you can imagine, PepsiCo brings in the best and brightest.
Exactly.
We brought in a CMO that developed what we called the Smart Lab, the Shopper Marketing Retail Testing Laboratory. But it was a laboratory to test neurologically everything you can imagine, guys. Taste test, copy test, package test, concept testing, everything neurologically. 5 neuroscientists on staff. But then we had this other area about the size of a Walgreens, and we just called it the theater. And in the theater, we just put up a bunch of different cameras. We hired checkout clerks, and it looked like anything we wanted to make it look like. We'd make it look like a Walgreens. We'd make it look like a Walmart. We could create temperature differences. We could, speed up music. I mean, everything, real shelves, the whole thing, planograms, everything. And I was, that was my next rotation. And I thought, okay, that'll be interesting. And I had an experiment go wrong. And in that experiment, that's what introduced me to behavioral economics, and it changed my life forever in that one experiment.
So talk about that experiment. This is an important catalyst. Tell the listeners about what you were setting out to do and what actually happened.
Yeah. So as you guys can imagine, the way we use this laboratory was that we would do pre-post. So what we do is we pre-recruit maybe 75, maybe 100 shoppers to come into this laboratory. Nobody knew what the laboratory was. Most people thought it was an academic laboratory. They weren't really sure. And they would come in and we would ask them, hey, here is $75 or $100. We want you to go grocery shopping. And then we'd get a pre. 100 people would go through my laboratory. They'd leave. Then we do a post the next day, oftentimes. And maybe in this case, we were actually doing package testing. So we redesigned the packaging for a brand in Frito-Lay. And when we did that, we were waiting. We got all for the first 75 people out the door. And then the new packaging didn't arrive. And so I didn't have a test. So we had already pre-recruited for the next day. We're bringing 75 people in. What am I going to do? I said, you know what, guys?
Plus, you've got staff and everything is set up. All your monitoring, everything is queued up to go, and you don't have the product that you're interested in testing.
That's right. So what do? I just say, all right, we're going to bring another 75 people in. I'll double my base size, and brought on 75 people. Everything was great. It was actually an analyst who was there, and she looked at the two data sets. I was just saying, merge the data sets. And she said, whoa, we have some really big differences between the two data sets. I was like, don't you tell anybody. Don't you ever tell anybody.
Right.
But word got out because, right, if I controlled all the variables you can control. I had the same types of shoppers, not the exact same shoppers, same types of shoppers, same planogram, same prices, same everything, but yet very different test versus control. And so which one do I believe? First, day one or day two? And so I was like, we need to go figure this stuff out. And in my world, that's not supposed to happen. As an econometrician, that's not supposed to happen. People, I created all the variables that I needed to create, to test. And unfortunately, word got out. And a senior vice president over there sat me down, a great guy, but he said, hey, Will, he goes, we spend a couple $1 million on this facility every year. And if you can't tell me which test is correct, I'm not sure why we need your laboratory. So in my head, I'm thinking, I have a year to go figure it out. But I didn't know what to even go. That's when I read, I believe divine intervention, God put predictably irrational in my hands. Like we all say in behavioral economics, it changed my life because I'm reading this book and I'm thinking to myself, my graduate degree, I'm paying student loans on a graduate degree that I don't believe in anymore. And I took a year to try to figure this stuff out. And we actually found out, we know what happened. It was with the introduction to the second day. Basically, somebody was helping us out. Our facilitator was helping us out and try to simplify the instructions. And we believe that's what happened, but it was a variable that wasn't controlled for. And we believe that's what it was. And so that just put me on to this, absolutely doing nothing but reading and getting everything I could, reading anything I could on human behavior, because all this stuff had no sense. I never took a psychology class before, guys. Like that wasn't my genre. I was an analytics guy.
Yeah.
This is fascinating because we're big fans of Bob Cialdini, and we've talked to Brian Ahern, one of his certified master class, presenters. And in fact, we met up with Cialdini in New York just a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking with him about how replication can be so sensitive to things like what pictures were on the wall, what was the temperature in the room, and so you took the rigor and extended the effort to get to the point where you could say it was the way the coordinator set it up. It was just a few words that ended up changing the way people behaved in the supermarket, in the lab,
which is
cool.
Well, but that's the interesting thing, right? It's very small differences can have a very large impact. And I think that's a lot of what behavioral science, and I think a lot of what your book is talking about too, and thinking through these, we don't often think, how we present something is going to make a difference. Particularly, I have an economics background too, right? You get your economics background says it shouldn't matter how it's set up because it's the same.
It's just utility. We're just trying to get utility. Yep.
Same utility, and so your setup has no impact on that utility. So you should be a rational player and be able to do that. That is not the case. All right. So going from working in Pepsi and bringing all this behavioral insight into that to writing your own book, help us understand what was the impetus for writing a book. I mean, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. So I'll even take a step back and say the reason why I got into this space of applying behavioral science principles into marketing was that when I was at PepsiCo, we did metaphor elicitation, we did implicit association, we had some anthropologists on staff. And so in Insights, we'd create these incredibly robust, insightful reports. But yet when we would hand those off to brand managers or hand those off to agencies, guys, there's just something lost in that translation. So on my best day, I would have incredible insights into the core motivations of a particular shopper. And yet, the copywriter in the room go, I love that scarcity effect that you talked about. So I'm just going to put limit 10. Like, no, actually there's so much more. So
yeah.
But I looked for companies that could help figure out how do you translate behavioral sciences into application. And I just couldn't find very many. So I'm sitting there and I knew all these books existed. I'm looking behind at my bookshelf over there. And I knew all these books existed, but there was no translation, there's no bridge between the two. So I remember I'm sitting there in my bedroom. It's like 2:30 at night. My wife, Melanie, she was also in Insights over there at Frito-Lay. And she's like, will you get out of here? And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. It's like 2:30 in the morning. I'm leaving. She goes, no, leave Frito-Lay. She's like,
Yeah.
but she's like, you're never going to read about chips at 2:30 the way you read about this. Like, just go already, because everyone knows you're not interested in chips anymore. You're interested in this. So that's why I started my company, Trigger Point.
Yep.
And at Trigger Point, I started working with lots of different brands, and I had the same issue. Different industries was always, how do you translate it to where we don't have to earn a PhD in psychology to understand how to apply it? So the book was a direct, almost ask of that. But a year ago, I was at a conference in Atlanta. It's called IIEX. And we had a behavioral design table. And so what they did was they said, hey, set up a table. There's going to be like a card that says behavioral design, and you're going to facilitate a conversation. You're not there to pitch. You're there to facilitate a conversation. So I sit there, and we have 8 chairs, and all of a sudden comes to 10, all comes to about 12 chairs. And I go, okay, everybody, it's all clients. So it's all different brands, banking, all sorts of different people. And I said, okay, so we're here to talk about behavioral design. And all of a sudden a hand raises up. So what is it? She goes, what's behavioral design? I go, oh, that's probably a good question. Let me tell you what it is. And I kind of defined it the way I define it. And then I said, so what books are you guys reading to help you translate the behavioral sciences into direct application? Crickets. Like nobody says anything. And I thought, somebody needs to do that. That's why I wrote the book. It took me about, about 13 months total to write that book because of that.
Wow.
I just wish it were that easy for everybody. Was my first thought. I just wish it were like, oh, I sat at a conference. I started talking to people. They asked a question. There was a need. And next year and a half, I wrote the book, and then boom. It sounds pretty simple.
Maybe that clear well that I was talking about that doesn't work. Maybe that was very clear at the time. Like, wait, here's what you need or whatever. Yeah, well, granted, I had a lot of help from people. So, the idea of writing a book is very different than actually doing the book. And I worked with a company that really helped bring that stuff out of my mind and did it all for me, for sure.
Because Tim and I have that idea all the time in our heads, and we're still in the muddy pit of like,
it's because we're living in 2 muddy pits.
Well, that is very true. It's so the double mud thing. So, Will, before we got online, we were talking a little bit, and we were talking about, so did you use any of the behavioral science principles in actually marketing of this book? And you were relating some little stories there. So help inform our listeners of how you applied all of these great insights into getting this product out there and doing everything.
I will. Well, I'll caveat this in that the book launched just over a week ago. And so what I did was I gave a speech yesterday, or I guess the day before, about how I used behavioral insights to, and the actual model that I talk about in the book, how I used it to build out my strategy and my tactics. So I had a 3-pronged strategy: email marketing, influencer marketing, and social media. And what's funny about when I was at the conference, tons of clients out in the audience, and I was telling them, I was very open about, here's what I did well, and here's some things that I didn't apply what I wrote about. I didn't even do it for myself. It's so much easier to critique somebody else's work than it is to critique yourself,
Always.
So, email marketing was actually, I actually did split testing on the headlines to test whether what we call the optimistic competence mind state, which are those people that are seeking to get better in their jobs, but are using a promotion regulatory lens, so they're seeking advancement and gains. And then another one was the empowerment. I use the empowerment motivation. So I call that optimistic empowerment mind state. And those are people who are seeking empowerment. So I did split testing on that. Email marketing went great. Here's where I screwed up majorly on influencer marketing. I sat down, I got a list of my favorite, like my heroes in my world, right? I wrote to Ariely, I wrote to Bree Williams, I wrote to Nathalie Nahai. I mean, all the people that you guys talked to, I wrote all these people. And then what I found, I was just looking at the emails, because I sent out about 60 different emails to influencers, and I got overall about 11 replies. And out of those 11, a few of them were like, hey, Will, would love to talk to you, but I'm not going to, right? They just said no. At least they replied. But what I noticed was in that email, I used 5 paragraphs to ask for 1 sentence. Please write a blurb for me. And it was the most passive thing. There was no motivational priming. There's no goal activation. I did reciprocity as a heuristic. I'll give you a free book if you write something. And so I had this moment where I showed my email to the audience, and I have all these lines pointing out, showing where I primed, and they're just empty space. I'm like, no, guys, you're reading that right. I did nothing that you're supposed to do that I taught in the book. I did nothing because I was almost in awe to even ask these people to like read my stuff. And so it was kind of, I was like, first off, you don't write 5 paragraphs of an email to ask somebody for a 1-sentence blurb, and went into that. And my social media, it's still TBD. I've been trying to do some interesting things with taking pop culture icons, so like The Walking Dead, and I actually have memes that I built out with, like, say, The Walking Dead, and I'll say, Rick Grimes is in the optimistic nurturance mind state right now. He's got like a 357 Magnum, and so I was just trying to maybe strike some oil, or hit gold if you want to, or hit oil or whatever, just to see if something could take off. I have a couple other social media things, trying to give out free content. I give a lot of free content out on my website. That actually wasn't all that influential either. The biggest thing that was interesting to me that hit is when you're transparent and you talk about your real life. And that's on LinkedIn. Like I talk about I have a picture of me talking with my son who, I travel a lot. And those, like when I just talk about that, I say, I'm traveling again, or the first time I'm about to go on stage, that has like 5,000-6,000 views on it, where when I'm giving free content out, a couple of hundred. It's really interesting because I thought I'll add value. And by providing you stuff, you will hopefully reply back and maybe go to my website. So either I'm not offering very valuable things, which could be, I hope I'm somewhat valuable, or I think in a cynical world, people just want to be open and see reality and your personality. So
it's interesting. I wonder if that's a component of social media in and of itself, and which social media platform that you're using, right? Because they're coming to a Facebook or, some of those others. And I wonder if it's different on LinkedIn versus,
Instagram,
versus Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I'm thinking how you're primed to go to certain different, social media platforms for different things in your life. And so the unexpected part about getting free content over on here may be not as relevant to the motivations that people are already going there for.
I'll build on that. When I show, so LinkedIn, I would have expected that would be for free content. These are business professionals. So I'm giving away my favorite behavioral science articles. So I'm pushing out free behavioral activation briefs. And I would assume that my personal posts would be better for Instagram.
Yeah.
Guys, LinkedIn is where those things are taking off. And I wonder if it's just because it's so differentiated from what people see. Because on LinkedIn, you're always celebrating, I'm speaking at this, or, I thank you. I'm so humbled by the recognition. And I wonder if it's because of that when you see something that's real, like you talking to or showing the openness of saying, I was so nervous that day, but then I have a picture of a guy holding my shoulder, like a mentor of mine. And I wonder if it's that, like, it just feels so unusual. Is that why people look at it and they want to engage with it? I don't know, because I was with you. I would have thought that never would have taken off on LinkedIn.
That's really
I think it's interesting. So I think there could be a couple things, and this will be something really that can hear our voices getting excited, right? We're getting geeking out about this, like figuring this out. So, but it could be the vividness of that component. You said that contrast of what you're tending to be. So it stands out. It's vivid. It pulls people in. It could also be that there's an emotional component that is lacking on the rest of LinkedIn, and that we just as humans crave that emotional component. It's the work I've done on change is, when you try to get people to change behaviors, you can talk rational all day and give them here's the reasons why you should do it, but you need to touch on some emotional component.
It could also be that it is that message is unique in the LinkedIn environment, and it might trigger more mirror neurons. It might actually sort of trigger that raw reciprocity and that social environment of, wow, and I wasn't expecting that, that vividness. Will, I wanted to go back to, you breezed over this idea of the regulatory lens, regulatory fit. You talk about that in the book. We haven't spent much time in podcasts with that, and I'm not sure if our listeners are all that familiar with regulatory fit.
Oh gosh, this is good stuff, guys.
Yeah, I know, and you super dig it. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about that and how you apply that to the marketing mind states?
I will. So first off, what I define as a mind state are these moments of temporary emotional arousal. And this idea, and we go through these probably 100 times, 200 times a day, but these moments where you're more open to suggestion and persuasion because you're into more of a system one emotional mind state. So a mind state is composed of 4 different things: people's goals, functional higher order goals. Think about jobs to be done. It's in the jobs to be done space, but it's basic goal theory.
Mhm.
Then you have motivational psychology, which is trying to understand the engine that people go after their goals. But then the third part is what I call, well, what I use as what I call approach in the book, but it's regulatory fit theory. It's work that came out of Tori Higgins' work, as well as Heidi Halverson, right?
Yep.
So they've been over there in Colombia, or at least Tori has been anyways, for 30 years, been focused on how do we go after our goals. And we all go after our goals in 1 of 2 ways. One way we go after our goals, and we're not either or, by the way, but depends in context, depends on the goal. But one way is called, you use a promotion regulatory lens. So in that space, if you're under a promotion regulatory lens, or what we call promotion regulatory fit, you are looking to maximize your chances of success or winning. So you're going to look for brands, messages, copy, pictures that will help tell you psychologically, if you take on this action, you are more likely to succeed. You can have the exact same goal, the exact same motivation. Other people will use what's called a prevention regulatory lens, or they'll use a prevention regulatory approach, and they will go after their goal seeking to minimize the chances of loss or minimizing risk. So I frame it up like this. Let's say, for instance, I'm selling potato chips, and I go talk to Gen X guys, and Gen X guys are looking for healthier potato chip. Great. So their goal, I want to lose weight. That's functional goal. Higher order goal, they could be saying, oh, you know what? And why is losing weight important? Oh, it's because I want to be there for my daughter's wedding. Every guy says that. Got it. What was the motivation? Nurturance. Got that. Some people, I'll say, what is your strategy? Some people are like, okay, if they're using a promotion regulatory lens, they're going to seek healthy foods. I want to find foods that are healthy, that they have nutrients, added vitamins and minerals. Got it. Other people will say, I want to avoid crap. So they're going to look for messages that talk about, I want to minimize saturated fats, taking out artificial preservatives. Guys, if you had a product and you had the same product, you would reframe that based upon, our product is giving you more nutrients, or we're eliminating bad. That's the power of promotion regulatory fit. It sounds small, but the words you use, the pictures you show, it matters dramatically. So if you want to learn more about that, read a book called Focus for your listeners. It's from Tori Higgins. It's about 3 years old. But what's great about it is that you can use this for parenting, which I talk about in my book. You can use it for management, like how do you manage employees or even up manage. It talks about your marriage. But he has a great way of taking this very simple concept and just using these words and this approach to just make choices easier. And the whole point is just find saliency. And if I can, like I say in the book, if I know that you're promotion in nature, if I can talk to you in that way, it just makes you feel more inclined to do, or at least be open to a behavioral suggestion. And that's all I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I noticed it recently in a print ad in a magazine where there's it was for a significant toothpaste brand. We won't name them, but the ad does both. On the top copy, how about that? Mm-hmm. So the image is the attractive female model smiling at the attractive male model, and the top is get your game on. And then at the bottom, it was and avoid gingivitis. It's like, I think they missed the boat by trying to package too much into a single message.
Maybe, I have this question all the time, and my clients will say, well, we're a promotion brand, but you're telling us that our shoppers want us to speak in prevention. Can't we do both? Because they don't want to change their brand. I'll say, it's funny. I differ with Tori on this. So Tori, who has been studying for 30 years, in the book, he would suggest it's okay to use both, because you have more breadth. I'm come from the PepsiCo very distinct point of differentiation. So I'm always focused on one. Choose one and rock it, because you can prime. You can use these words. You can use the visuals. You can use these frames to prime somebody temporarily into a state of regulatory focus. They have natural inclinations, but doesn't mean you can't take somebody who wanted to lose weight by avoiding bad. It doesn't mean you can't convince them or just kind of slightly tweak it to temporarily think, well, nutrients are good too. So we differ on this, but I come from the very classically trained PepsiCo, stand for something and be consistent. But me and Tori would probably debate this over a beer if I could get him into a room. Maybe we debate this over a beer one day.
I want to be there. We want to be there for that conversation.
Well, I just want to be there for the beer. So,
that too. That's
I don't know about you guys. So Will, tell us a little bit. So in your book, and you talk about a client that you worked with, Wicked Crisp, and it was just fascinating, the work, and you were kind of given a blank sheet, and tell us a little bit about some background of that.
How did it get started?
How did it get started? That's a cool story. So help the listeners understand.
To this day, it's my favorite project I've ever worked on, because it's not just from intellectual perspective, but just from a heart perspective and emotional perspective. I was literally in a grocery store in Dallas, Texas, doing something called a behavioral audit, just observing some behavior or shopping behaviors. And I got a random call from North Carolina. And it was a gentleman who worked at a company called Carolina Fine Snacks. He was the founder. His name was Phil Kosak. And he said, "Hey, Will, or is this Will Leach?" I said, "Yep." And somehow he found me through literally, he wrote, what he told me was he typed into a browser Frito-Lay because he's selling a chip, and he wrote behavior. And somehow my name rose to the top on that.
Way to go.
Yeah. So apparently, right, this guy was actually at Frito-Lay as a food scientist back in the mid to late 70s. And he had a whole bunch of different patents. The guy he's brilliant. And Phil Kosak is a brilliant engineer, PhD in food science. And he developed a chip. I don't like to call it a chip. It is a nutrient device. It's described. But he's brilliant. So his whole career, he has always made chips for other people. He's what's called a co-packer. So let's say you and I want to create a company. We'd go to Phil. "Hey, Phil, we want you to create this chip for us." He'll go make it, package it for us, and distribute it for us. He wants to do it himself in this case, but he's never done marketing. He's never had to do this before. He's like, he called it the brass ring, but he's like, "I've been developing products for everybody else. And I would like for you to help me build a brand." And he goes, "But I have no money. I have like a workforce of about 20 people. I won't be able to afford marketing." And so I'm like getting ready to hang up on the guy, because like, this is no, I'm not going to do this, right? There's no way. Because you get these calls, right? You know how it is. They get these calls from people who are asking for the impossible. Because he also says this. He says, "I want to change the American diet by this snack. This is like nutrient snacking." He goes, "I want to change the American diet." So I'm literally like, come on. But he says, he's used the word behavioral science, and nobody ever tells. They may say behavioral economics. They certainly don't say, maybe, but he knew enough about the science that said, "I can't compete against Frito-Lay. I don't have 1/10 of 1% of their marketing budget, but I think I can compete on behavioral sciences." So brought my team out there. And when I got to this, to the site, I knew within a half hour, I wanted to make this guy a billionaire. He's this guy that is the most generous person you can imagine. He's brilliant. He feeds us these snacks that taste so delicious. They're not just good for you, they are way good for you. Like you could make the case that these are better than eating broccoli off the vine. I don't know if I'd say that off the plant, but it's close. They taste great. He was giving us all this apple pie, all these different flavors. But then he says, "Why don't you come out to the back room?" And then he shows me the manufacturing site. And what's great about his manufacturing plant is that Phil hires people with lots of different either disabilities or disadvantages in life. So people maybe that have come out of prison that just can't find a job, people that have disabilities, mental disabilities, and physical handicaps sometimes, and disabilities. And here's what he does. He buys old equipment from, say, Kellogg's back in the 70s. And he says, "I'm going to modify," because he's an engineer. He modifies the equipment so that it fits the people who have these disabilities inside of his warehouse. Because in his world, he's like, "Why would I spend money on technology when I can buy technology cheap and give people who otherwise are just kind of marginalized in our society? No way. I'm going to give these people, I'm going to create a job for them." And so one of the greatest cases was, I'm sitting there and I'm watching this guy, and he's taking pallets and he's wrapping them with cellophane. And so Phil had to sign to him because he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak. But Phil was able to sign to him. And he said, "This guy, he does all our inventory, and we don't have an inventory control system. It's him. It's in his brain." Right. And I was like, this guy, I'll make a billionaire, because we need more Phils in this world, where everyone else would say, go to technology, get rid of people. Phil goes about the other way. He's like, I want to use technology to enable people, but he really puts his mouth or his words where his mouth is, or, his actions. So it was great. So we designed a brand for him, guys. We did some basic research to understand what's the key mind state that we wanted to design a brand around. And in this case, it was the optimistic autonomy mind state. And then from there, we built out the name, which, back then we were like, was it going to be Phil's Chips or whatever? But we went all the way from the name, the tagline, the logo design, the packaging design, the copy on the pack, the website, everything. And we launched that thing out. So as a research company, we rarely, even as a researcher, you will get to launch your own brand once, twice in your entire career. Right. And certainly you're not going to be the person who's actually working with the person talking about logo design. But that's the power of behavioral design, because I always say this, we as researchers, we are uniquely qualified to do work like that because we study human behavior every day. Marketers, they build brands, they build businesses, agencies build brands. We build human connection because we do it. And so I thought to myself, when am I ever going to have a chance to work with designers on a logo? I just won't. I'll test it as a researcher. I would never do the work. And very, very successful company, very successful company now.
Yeah. I was so excited reading your book and learning about Phil and about Wicked Crisp that I started doing some research on the products, and don't see it in my local supermarket, which I'm going to make the request. I'm going to let them know that this isn't a product that they can just avoid not having, that they need to be proactive in getting the product. And I was inspired by Phil's enthusiasm, his intellect, certainly, and the way that he deals with the people in his factory. Amazing. He's a one of a kind, and I agree with you completely. But it was because of Marketing to Mind States that I got inspired about that. So it still comes back to you, Will. Man.
Well, it's interesting. We did a podcast about how do you apply behavioral science inside of organizations, and we talked about some of those things. And what you're saying matches up a lot with what we were talking about. Somebody at that senior level who is open to this, because it's really hard to get somebody who has their preconceived ideas about how you need to go to market, how you need to do this plant or this whatever it is that they're doing. And so it sounds like Phil was open to this. And then it's this ability to engage with people that you just feel a connection with. And that part is the part that spurs some of that intrinsic motivation that really gets you beyond, like you said, I'm sure you're getting paid somehow, but you didn't have much money and everything else. And this is a labor, it's a labor of love more than it is a labor of finance. So.
It was, for perspective, we lost money, I think, on that project, but I feel like it was the most profitable project I've ever worked on. Really.
Yeah.
It just was. It made me feel better about myself.
How is it doing? How is Wicked Crisp doing in the market? Can you give us just an overview of how it's performing?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So for perspective, there are probably hundreds of chip companies that get launched every year, and within a couple of weeks they get crushed. There's a machine called Kellogg's and Frito-Lay that makes sure that it's very difficult to get distribution. I will tell you that their distribution numbers were insane. And again, they had no pricing study, so they couldn't really walk in to a retailer and talk about these studies that they did because they don't have the money to do a $65,000 study. They just have the narrative that we built this brand based upon psychology. Last time I looked, they were distributed in tens of thousands of grocery stores in year one, which is unheard of, tens of thousands. At one point, I know that they were negotiating with an airline to become placed on airlines.
Great.
They told me that. And they're actually all over the place in things like Big Lots. They found smaller distribution opportunities like in, say, a Big Lots or in Best Buy, things like that. So you can find them. Last time I saw them was at I think was it Whole Foods, but in natural stores as well, which is really different placement. But they grew astronomically quickly because of, it's a good product too, by the way, right?
Right.
It really is. But he grew because he could go into buyers and say, we designed this to tap into the psychology of the shopper you're looking for, which are millennial moms. And if we can create a brand that kind of engages her, she's going to be more likely to engage with your shopping or with your store. So it was a great story, which got him some really good placement.
That's pretty terrific.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
okay.
Tim is making the move to say it's time to talk music.
We haven't talked about music yet.
And this is the time where I just check out and
No.
you guys go and have your conversation. And no, I love music too. I'm just joking. It's our little thing that we go back and forth on.
You do. He gives me a hard time all the time about it. But Kurt is the first to just join in. Okay, so you grew up in South Florida, though, right?
I did.
All right.
That's right. Yep.
But you've been in Texas for some time.
13 years. Never thought I'd be here more than 2. You meet a girl. Yeah, it all starts with a girl, right? And then
starts with a girl.
There's a country song in there somewhere.
Actually, that is a country song. It starts with that. That's not somewhere. Actually, that line. This is a little this is a rabbit hole. Okay, but I'm a songwriter, right? So one of the things that I'm always paying attention to is great lines like that. It starts with a girl. It's a great line, and I have a friend who is a songwriter who says, songwriting is like being a vampire, where you can just go in and just suck the blood out of somebody, and they just keep on living. They just keep on doing their whole thing, but you've got their blood. And so you just gave me your blood on that, man.
Go forth. Go suck it. You're good.
It starts with a girl is a great line. No, but I want to, and there are great musicians that come from South Florida, but I'd like to talk about your influence and your interest in the tremendous number of musicians that have come from Texas. Going back to Buddy Holly, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean, there's this rich history. And I'm wondering, have you tapped into the lineage of Texas music since you've been there?
So I'll tell you, when I first got to Texas, I was an outsider because I brought in all that music was coming out of Miami back in like the early 2000s. So I was the guy who was blaring R&B, and not that I necessarily enjoyed it. It just made me different. Like we're all seeking for self-identity or to differentiate ourselves, and everyone else, right? So I was the Miami guy. That was me, and I was going to blast Biggie and P. Diddy and all that stuff. But very quickly you realize that although you may differentiate yourself, the real prettiest girls in Texas, they like the George Strait, the Pat Greens. So I fell in love with it. I'll tell you, I went to Texas A&M for my master's, and over there, it being an Aggie, if you can do some swing dancing to Pat Green, then you're going to be in a good situation on most Fridays and Saturday nights. So so I came very quickly into George Strait, appreciating Robert Earl Keen and Pat Green, kind of that Texas country, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Waylon up to a little bit before my time, which is unusual because actually, though, Texas has that influence, I'm a Gen Xer, so that grunge scene was massive for me back in, going in high school. But then I kind of swerved into Motown. My mom always tells me, she goes, you were born the wrong generation, because I love kind of old Beatles, Motown, that whole thing. So I moved from grunge, which is I hate the government and nobody understands us, all into Motown for years. And then,
wow,
isn't that crazy? Yeah. I don't know. I'm an eclectic man, I guess. But then, neither of those plays well out if you're an Aggie. So, it doesn't play well.
So, but your musical taste actually started with a girl then too, because you obviously switched over for that component.
Most things do start in that way. Yeah.
There. So Motown, who from Motown?
Are you talking about Smokey Robinson, Temptation, Supremes, Joe and Eddie,
Aretha Franklin? Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Aretha Franklin changed me. Oh yeah. No, totally.
Queen of Soul.
Totally. Yeah, that was a big loss for us. So yep. I still love Bill Withers too, man. I listen to Lovely Day all the time. Like I think I would be on those billboards that Spotify puts up there. Like I'm a Spotify billboard because I listen to it almost every morning. It's my ringtone. It is, but it reminds me of everything that I love about my marriage, right? It's like, it's because of you. It's because of you. So it always brings me like to a great place. So I'm huge on Bill Withers, Aretha Franklin, and Four Tops. I still love them too.
Yeah.
4 tops. Yeah. And so it almost sounds like you're using Lovely Day as a priming, right? It's not just a reminder, but it's an attitude adjuster or a prime.
No, absolutely. It's funny. I'm actually naturally pretty introverted, except when I talk about these sciences. I know, so that prime you're talking about, we talk about here over Trigger Point, that Chuckles, like my alter ego is Chuckles, where when I talk about this stuff, I'm lively, I'm excited. And then when I get off stage, Will Leach comes back in. But Lovely Day is absolutely used to start my mornings off right, especially when I'm traveling. You get in the shower, you kind of put the music on as loud as you can in the shower, and just that's the way to start your morning. That's it.
I'll bet the people in the hotel rooms next to you really love that.
Especially when it's on repeat. And I'll repeat that 7 times, dude. 7 times, no doubt. But, we all have our quirks, right?
Yeah. Well, I would be aligned with your grunge taste probably more than the Motown or the Texas country, but I'm open for all of it.
So Kurt, were you more like Nirvana or Pearl Jam or?
So I got into those in my grad school years in the early 90s before. Yeah, but that was kind of that Seattle sound was definitely there for a while, and then it spread into across the country and various different.
It's terrific.
And you look back and you go to some of the influence around that came from Minnesota with Husker Du, the Replacements, some of that old kind of music there. So, but we digress.
And I would also say that Nirvana wouldn't have happened without Motown. Without Berry Gordy's production, with his focus on Jackson 5 or Smokey Robinson, you can hear that drive and that backbeat in the way Nirvana plays. I think Dave Grohl has even admitted that. By the way.
I can totally see Dave Grohl being influenced, but it's all halo effect. Let's talk about behavioral science, right? We all halo each other. We all take influences from everybody. It's all there somewhere, whether it's blues, country, it's all in there somewhere. They don't even know it, but it's there. It all just evolves. It all just evolves.
It is. And
my son just calls it angry. My son just like, it's that angry music again. I'm like, no, it's Nirvana. It's not angry.
It's not angry.
No, just identify with it.
I know. It's anyway. All right. So Will, we also end on these with what are 3 tips. If you had to give our listeners 3 tips that they can go out and start using today about applying behavioral science in their life or work, make it better, what would those 3 things be?
Yeah, the first thing, guys, is understand that every behavior is towards a goal, whether we know it or not. So identifying your goal, whether that's getting my kid to eat vegetables or whether I want a promotion or just do I make a left turn or right turn, understanding goals is really, really important. If you don't understand your goals, or if you're not using goals in your marketing, you may be creating emotional arousal towards a different brand. So always know a goal. In fact, I just posted something on LinkedIn about that. I still love the regulatory fit idea. And what I really mean by that is just understand that saliency matters, meaning make people's thinking as easy as possible. I don't want to say thinking because that's not even the right word, but make people's movements as easy as possible. And sometimes the easiest thing I tell people to do, we need to drive sales really quickly. The third thing is behavioral triggers. Just tell the mind what to do and when to do it. And somehow we got out of this thing because we don't like call to actions. We don't like to say it, buy now, because especially in the consumer packaged goods space, because it's ugly marketing. I want to create stories with my brand. Brother, if you just tell people buy now, you'd be surprised. You get a quick shift in sales. It may not be long-term, but it's something you can do. Just tell the mind what to do and when to do it. Something I didn't do in my influencer marketing campaign, by the way. And that's probably why I didn't get a lot of influencers giving me emails back. To me, it's just some of the basics, but there's behavioral science behind those basics. And I think sometimes we forget about those. And we're trying so hard to be narratives and build brand emotional connections. There's science behind that. There's science behind that stuff. And hopefully the book will teach you some of those sciences.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Will Leach, thank you so much for your time. This has been so much fun. We want to just make sure that everybody who is listening to this goes out and buys Marketing to Mind States, the practical guide. I'm just so emphasizing practicals because you're so right. This is the practical guide to applying behavioral design to research and marketing. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure. Would love to be back when we hit let's do 2 million copies. I'll come back and we'll
2 million. There we go. We got it.
You're on.
You're on. We'll take it.
Well, I hope to see you again sometime then.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavior Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our full body minds.
Is this related to this research on enzymes in your stomach that have a mind of its own?
Well, actually, there's like neurons throughout your body that are similar to your brain neurons. I guess I don't really buy into it. I need to see more research on it. You know, it's one of those things.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really, but that gut feel that you get might actually be a real gut feel. It might be from your gut, or that emotion from your heart might actually be an emotion that comes from the heart and not just a manifestation of your brain making it all up.
Okay, I'm skeptical, but I also know that there's a lot of things that we don't know. Science hasn't discovered everything.
What?
Not yet. Science is on its way,
I
but
was hoping that it would all be figured out by the time I got to this level.
I know.
All right, so Tim, tell me what was really interesting about our talk with Will.
Well, it's hard for me to start anywhere other than the discussion about Phil Cusack.
Yeah.
My gosh, Wicked Crisps, the work that he did with Phil was so cool. Clearly, Will jumped in because Will got to see two things in Phil Cusack, right? One is he's very committed to creating a healthy snack food, which is cool. And second of all, his business model is all about helping people with cognitive impairments and physical impairments. And I thought, man, that's amazing. And Will totally keyed into that and was like, man, I'm going there.
Right.
And I thought that was so cool. First of all, because I was unaware of the story of Wicked Crisps. And so that was great to hear that. But it was really cool to hear how Will really is, as I think he said, he's trying to help him become a billionaire.
Right. And I think that the cool part about that is because of the insights that Will could bring from behavioral science into the small, basically, startup.
Yeah.
Wicked Chris was now able to compete against global giants that otherwise he may not have been able to really succeed. And so the fact that Will is able to help out, that applying the insights from behavioral science at a small company can have an impact of making that company more successful and being able to compete in markets that may be way above its head, that's really, I think, a key piece. And it's hopefully what maybe some of our listeners are trying to do as well, because they're being able to take some of the insights that behavioral science brings and apply that to the work and to their life, and to be able to operate at a level that is much higher than they would otherwise.
Definitely. Will's work with Wicked Crisps is allowing them to box above their weight. Absolutely. I think Will said something along the lines of 10,000 retail outlets have already adopted Wicked Crisps as in their product line, and you think, man, that's just terrific when they're competing against giants like PepsiCo and Frito-Lay and Procter and Gamble. And
Frito-Lay and PepsiCo are the same, but yeah, that's okay.
Different divisions within. Frito-Lay is a subsidiary.
But Nestle and all of the other big,
and these are monstrous companies.
Yes.
And the kind of marketing dollars that they have to research and implement can be counterbalanced by really good work that Will is doing using behavioral sciences.
Using that science in order to understand what motivates behavior, how you can market more successfully. What do you need to do from a packaging perspective? I just, the talk that he did about how they were looking at the branding and all of those different components, really applying some of those insights into human behavior are a cool aspect. And I think it's one of the, hopefully, lessons that we can all take from this is really thinking through, behavioral grooves. We can think about it for this podcast. How do we market this? Because
absolutely,
we're the cobbler's kid, right? And we don't necessarily always apply our own lessons.
And a very young kid too.
But we go without shoes, right? Or our
Yeah.
shoes are worn and tired. We don't necessarily always apply
No.
some of the insights that we know about, that we just need to spend some time thinking through and focusing on in order to actually achieve.
It's
that.
hard. It's hard.
It is hard, but there's some really good insights, and
Yes.
Will is able to do that. Maybe we should hire Will. That's
Maybe
what
we should.
do. Yeah,
Maybe
there
we
you
should.
go.
Okay, Kurt, how about you? What came to light for you in our conversation with Will Leach?
So I love the talk about the 4 components that marketing to mindset talks about. Activating a goal, obviously priming a need is something that
Yeah.
wow, it was really new to me. Priming. Oh, sorry, I was
Oh,
joking.
yeah, you were out of that
I
was
was
an out of
being-
body experience.
I was
there?
being facetious there.
No sarcasm.
Yes. Framing that choice, framing a big component of, I think, a lot of the work that we do around, working inside of organizations and doing other things, but just framing that communication to frame the choice in a way that is going to really, to this last part, trigger that behavior, right?
Yeah.
The one piece of that we didn't get a chance or we didn't bring up in the conversation that I wish we would have, because it's a key piece, I think, for both you and me, is thinking about making sure that we apply this ethically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Behavioral science, and particularly behavioral science when it's targeted towards consumers or others, any other, has the potential to be misused.
Yeah, these are very powerful tools.
Right.
Priming alone is an extremely powerful tool. Much less get into framing choices and choice architecture and a whole variety of those
And
things.
triggering the behavior, right? And what did he say? Tell the mind to do and when to do it. I mean, that could be manipulative if it is
Right.
done in a non-positive way,
That's right.
without some transparency and a variety of other factors. So I wish we would have had that conversation with Will. From just talking with him and from reading the book, I he's definitely a very ethical person. I would have just liked to have
Absolutely, yeah.
talked to him about, what are some of the ethical considerations when you're applying these into organizations or with organizations? Because I think there are some people out there might not be quite as ethical as Will or as you or me.
Well, this is a biased blind spot for me when you and I are having these conversations. We know that we're having it on a level that is very much focused on an ethical application, and I tend to believe that most people who are listening to this podcast are going to make those applications ethically, with forethought and consideration for the impact on the people who are who they're going to be influencing. There are probably bad agents out there, right?
What?
Yeah, I know.
I know.
It's possible, so I think it's good that we do have this conversation about ethics and to remind people that the importance of these tools really comes to light when we're doing it in a right fashion.
Right. And the need to be vigilant about that, particularly as consultants who are working with others on this, because I think, with knowledge comes some responsibility and understanding what we're able to do with this, but also understanding the implications that some of that might have, and educating our clients on it, and making sure that we stay true to our own values as a consultant in doing that. So
Yeah, there were times in some of the work that we've both done a lot of work in incentives, and there have certainly been times when I've questioned whether or not the incentive could be so powerful, such a driver of behavior, that it might get in the way of other, that the reward aspect of this tied with a specific behavior could actually detract from other behaviors. It could have negative impact on sort of the rest of the job.
right.
And I think we have to take that into consideration.
Well, there's always particularly with incentives, right? When we think about putting an incentive program together or any type of reward or motivational program, what are some of the unintended consequences? Are you driving out other behaviors? Are you driving out intrinsic motivation? Are you,
Yes.
as opposed to enhancing intrinsic motivation? And so you have to think through all of that. And also, are you making a motivation so powerful that it becomes this almost addictive component that it goes against that person's natural inclination
Yes.
to
yes.
really make them do things that they wouldn't otherwise do? I mean, is the reward so powerful that, it goes back to that question. I mean, would you have sex with somebody for $1 million? Whatever. What was that? I think there was
There's a movie about that.
movie, right? And to a point where, if that's against your values, then that the reward or the driver that we're using creates this desire, this need almost that you do a behavior that you wouldn't normally otherwise do.
Yeah, that circumvents your values, basically.
Circumvents your values or your morals or however you want to think about it. We have to take responsibility to say we need to think about that, because that is actually getting very manipulative.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what we want to be doing as behavioral scientists.
And
I don't think it's what I think it'll it's bad for us, but I think in the long term it's going to be bad for behavioral science.
And a good pre-mortem, working through the counterfactuals can help reveal those kinds of things.
Yes.
A good discussion of working through, well, what would happen if this actually worked, and what would happen if it didn't work?
Right.
And what are the implications to those things, and why would it work, or why wouldn't it? Why would it not work?
Yeah, and thinking through, some of those out of the blue potential implications of what this is.
Yes.
The small percentage chance, those black swans, whatever you want to call them, but thinking through some of those just to prompt and say, well, could that really happen? Right? And even though the percentage, the likelihood of it might be small, does the impact of that potential negative consequence outweigh any gain that you would potentially get from this?
We have both worked with customers in industries where gaming the system is rampant, and having to design rules that accommodate and prevent those people, those who are on the outliers, right? They're
Right.
on the fringe, but they're there, and they will game the system unless there is a barrier established to keep that. And I think that we need to do that when we're talking about applying these tools. We need to create barriers to say we're not going to go beyond this whatever this stake in the ground is, to say beyond that's going to be manipulative.
Right. We have guardrails, and you need to stay within those guardrails to a
Yes.
certain degree. What else? What other facets of this conversation, or whatever else comes into our crazy little heads, right?
I love the discussion about music with Will. That was so fun. I mean, he's, okay, so we grew up in Florida. He's living in Texas. So he has a very simple model. If I'm going to meet the cute girl, I gotta, what is it that cute girls do? Well, they listen to country music, so I gotta listen to country music. It's a great little behavioral thing right there.
It is.
He wanted to be in that tribe.
At least the girls in Texas listen to
there's-
that country music, right?
Yes.
But that's
Highly contextual.
highly contextual.
Yeah.
But you're looking at your own behavior, as opposed to and shifting your own behavior
Yes.
to meet the needs of the customer or the potential, girl, gentleman, whatever you are going after in that. But
It's a
interesting.
great behavioral story right there.
Well, and what I liked about it is he said, I actually, I think there was I don't know if he said this outright, but there was the implication that, I actually kind of started to like that music, right?
yeah,
So it's
that's
almost the fake it till you make it, and I listened to it, it's not that bad, or
Not that
I
bad.
actually liked it. So
That's right. So speaking of music,
Oh, God.
we did talk. We talked
Here it
about
comes.
we talked about Motown, and there was a there was a pretty pointed discussion about Nirvana. Yeah, right.
Now-
So I wanted to ask you, do you remember the first time you heard Nirvana? You know, what, or was there a point when you were like, wow, because you really connected to Nirvana when you were younger?
Well, I did. I liked Nirvana, and I don't remember the first time, but I can tell you a time. I was in getting my MBA in an apartment, and I remember I had the cassette tape, right? Because that's what
Oh my
I
God.
bought, right?
What is a cassette tape?
Yeah, I think
we're gonna have
I'm
to.
pretty sure I had the cassette tape.
We'll have to have a link on our show notes as to tell people what a cassette tape is.
Right. But I was listening, and you know, I was pulled into Nirvana. I think from like many people, you know, it smells like Teen Spirit. But I was listening to Lithium, which is just a powerful, powerful song. And I mean, I can still envision in my head being there and just, you know, back when your speakers were about the size
9
of a
feet
small
tall.
car, and
Right.
you know, I was probably pissing off all of my neighbors. Thankfully, they are all other, you know, college students, so it wasn't too bad, right? But I just had that going so loud in the middle of an afternoon one day, and it was just, you know, just really getting into that music and feeling it and various different things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Lithium is intense,
yeah.
heavy duty,
Right, yeah.
stuff.
So, what about you? You have a connection with Nirvana, or they were not really your style, your thing?
No, they were not.
Okay.
But
That Seattle sound was just not you, grunge. You didn't-
it was not until. So this is a great example of when the in tribe. You know, Bob Cialdini talks about. You know, the in tribe person says, "Well, I used to think this way, but now I think this way."
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that happened for me one day when I picked up Rolling Stone magazine because I was a regular subscriber for many years, and there is Neil Young jamming with Nirvana,
Oh yeah.
and I was like, oh. Well, he's one of my guys. Like he's in my tribe, and now he's jamming with Nirvana. And so that was the first time that I was willing to sort of take them seriously. I'm like, okay, I'm in.
If Neil likes them, I should like them.
There
right?
was some, I think there was some of that.
Well, that's that social proof, right?
Absolutely,
So you're
absolutely.
somebody who you admire and you look after, you know, up
Yeah.
to. Now they like Nirvana. Maybe I should give these kids a chance, right? And-
Well, and they're incredibly talented guys.
right. So my other Nirvana story is.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, this is just a total rabbit hole aside that we're gonna go down. I was in Memphis, and I was there for work, and I was with a friend of ours, Kevin Crowley, who you know, and we went to go see Graceland, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we went to when Graceland was closed, so it was closed.
No way.
Yeah, so it was.
Is it ever? I didn't think it was ever closed.
Yeah, it was closed. Anyway, it was
I
closed.
thought it was open like 365 days a year.
Nope, it was closed. And so we went, and for people who haven't gone to Graceland, first off, I had always envisioned it being this little out in the country somewhere, pristine kind of thing, and you're driving down the road. This is in the 90s, so 95. It was after Kurt had committed suicide. So
Kurt Cobain, the leader of Nirvana.
the leader, he had committed suicide probably the year before. Anyway, driving down, and there's like all these, you know, fast food places, oil change places, and then it's like, oh, turn left, and now you're in, you know, Graceland, right? But there's this stone wall that's up in front of Graceland, and then a fence on top of it, if I remember right, and it has all this graffiti on it. Like people are writing, and then one of the stones or bricks that's in this wall, it said, "Jam with Kurt. He'll show you some new things." And
Wow.
and it was like
It spoke to you.
It spoke to me.
Like
It's like jam with Kurt. He'll
message?
show you some new things. And Kurt Cobain spelled his name just like me with a K, the right way, right? And
lucky
so
guy,
I'm like looking at this, not putting the fact of that. Oh, this is intended to be
About Nirvana.
Nirvana, you know. So all right, hey Elvis, go jam with Kurt, you know, just like Neil jammed with Kurt, you know. But I was like, oh, Elvis is talking to me. It
How
wasn't about
that?
me. It was all about
Oh,
Kurt
well-
Cobain.
oh,
So yeah, there you
Okay.
go.
Because Elvis was dead at this point, right?
Well, yes.
So it would have been a tough gig.
Yeah, well, but Kurt and Elvis were dead, so they can jam together now.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Got it. Okay. All right.
Sorry if I just took us down a rabbit hole that everybody's listening, going, "What the hell was that
Yeah,
for?"
what the hell was that?
Yeah, go live your own little fantasies, Kurt. All right.
So with that,
With that, I
Thank you.
guess, yeah, thank you, and keep on grooving.